They spit on Harlan Briggs at his own wife's funeral. 37 years ago, the good people of Pine Valley watched 7 women burn alive in his house, or so they thought. They blamed him for every scream, every life lost, every family destroyed. They drove him off like a rabid dog, forcing him to live alone on his cursed ranch while decent folks raised their children in peace. Murderer, they whispered when he came to town for supplies. Woman killer, they hissed behind his back. The truth was worse than they imagined and completely different. Only his wife Sarah died that night. The other 6 women lived. But Harlan let the whole town believe he was a monster because the real story would have broken their hearts. Now, with 7 new widows standing on his porch in the pouring rain begging for the same help that killed the others, the town's fury is about to explode. Because if they find out he's taking in more victims, they won't wait for another fire. They'll burn him alive themselves. Before we uncover the shocking truth that tore this community apart, make sure to like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with our amazing viewers worldwide. Now let's see what really happened that deadly night. The coffee mug slipped from Harlan Briggs's weathered hands. Hot brown liquid splashed across his worn leather boots as the ceramic shattered on the wooden porch floor. His breath caught in his throat like a fishhook. 7 women stood in his doorway. 7 women with red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips. 7 women clutching small suitcases and worn purses. 7 women soaked to the bone by the Montana rain that hammered his ranch like angry fists. "Please," whispered the first woman. Her voice was soft and broken. "We have nowhere else to go." Harlan's hands started shaking. The same violent tremors that had plagued him for 37 years whenever someone needed his help. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Behind the women, lightning split the dark sky in half. This couldn't be happening. Not again. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice rough as sandpaper from years of talking only to his old dog. "I can't help you." The youngest woman stepped forward. She had dirt under her fingernails and hope dying in her brown eyes, tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "My children are in that van," she pleaded, pointing to the broken-down vehicle sitting crooked in his driveway. Steam poured from under its cracked hood like the breath of a dying animal. "They're hungry and scared. Just one night. Please." Harlan's chest felt like someone was squeezing his heart with iron fists. Through the van's fog windows he could see small faces pressed against the glass. 2 little boys with messy hair and wide eyes that reminded him of another child from long ago. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. Another stormy night. Other desperate people. The terrible mistake that changed everything. "I said I can't," Harlan repeated, but his voice cracked like old wood. He started to push the door closed, but his hands wouldn't obey him. "Sir," said another woman. This one had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire glasses. "We're not asking for charity. We can work. We can pay. We just need shelter until the storm passes," added a third woman with paint stains on her fingers. Harlan shook his head hard. They didn't understand. Nobody ever understood. He wasn't being mean. He was protecting them. From him. From what always happened when people got too close. The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal. Rain pelted the porch roof so hard it sounded like gunfire. The youngest woman's teeth chattered as she held her thin coat tight around her shoulders. "My boys haven't eaten since yesterday," she whispered. "Tommy keeps asking why we can't go home. I don't know what to tell him anymore." Something broke inside Harlan's chest. He thought about the last time someone had knocked on his door asking for help. He thought about Sarah's laugh echoing through these same empty rooms. He thought about the fire that took everything away. But looking at these women, really looking at them, he saw something that scared him more than his own memories. He saw himself lost, alone, forgotten by a world that moved on without. The oldest woman stepped closer. She had white hair braided down her back and hands that looked like they'd worked hard their whole life. "We know about you," she said quietly. "The whole town knows the story. About what happened 37 years ago." Harlan's blood turned to ice water. His knees almost buckled. "But we also know," she continued, "that you saved 6 women that night. 6 women who lived because of you. 1 died," Harlan croaked. "Sarah died because I wasn't fast enough." "1 died," the woman agreed. "But 6 lived. And right now, 7 more need saving." Lightning flashed again, turning the world white for a heartbeat. In that bright moment, Harlan saw something impossible. He saw Sarah standing behind the women, her red hair shining, her green eyes full of the love that had given him 2 years of happiness before the fire stole her away. Sarah smiled at him. The same smile she'd given him the first time she'd asked him to trust her. The same smile that had convinced him to open his heart after years of being alone. "Trust them," her memory whispered. "Trust yourself." The vision faded, but the feeling stayed. For 37 years, Harlan had lived with guilt eating him alive like acid. For 37 years he'd told himself he was cursed, that anyone who got close to him would suffer. But what if he'd been wrong? What if hiding from love wasn't protecting people? What if it was just another kind of death? Thunder crashed overhead like the sky was falling apart. The children in the van started crying. The women huddled closer together, hope draining from their faces as they prepared for another rejection. Harlan looked at his empty house behind him, looked at the cold rooms that hadn't heard laughter in decades, looked at the life he'd wasted being afraid. Then he looked at the 7 women who needed him, really needed him. His hand moved to the door handle. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at him to slam the door and run, to protect them from the curse that followed him everywhere. But Sarah's voice whispered again in the wind. "Some chances only come once, Harlan. Some chances are worth the risk." "Come in," he heard himself say. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign, like speaking a language he'd forgotten. "All of you, come in out of the rain." The relief on their faces nearly broke him. The youngest woman, the mother, started crying harder, but these were different tears. Happy tears. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Oh, thank you." As the 7 women hurried into his house, shaking off rain and calling to the children in the van, Harlan stood frozen on his threshold. He'd just made a choice that would change everything. The question was, would it end the same way as before? Or was this his chance to finally get it right? Behind him, his empty house filled with voices for the first time in 37 years. Ahead of him, storm clouds gathered darker than ever, as if the sky itself knew that some storms change everything they touch. Harlan Briggs stepped back into his house and closed the door behind him, sealing all their fates together. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back now. The 7 women stood dripping in Harlan's living room like ghosts who had suddenly become real. Their wet shoes squeaked against the hardwood floors he hadn't bothered to polish in years. Water pooled beneath their feet, creating dark stains on wood that had forgotten what life looked like. "I'll get towels," Harlan mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. He stumbled toward the hallway closet, his legs unsteady as a newborn calf. His hands shook as he pulled out towels that smelled like dust and loneliness. When had he last done laundry for anyone but himself? The youngest woman, the mother, pushed back outside into the storm. Through the window, Harlan watched her carry 2 small boys from the van. They clung to her neck like baby monkeys, their thin arms wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Tommy, Jake, we're safe now," she whispered to them as she came back inside. "This nice man is letting us stay." "Nice man?" The words hit Harlan like stones. He wasn't nice. Nice men didn't let people die. Nice men didn't spend 40 years hiding from the world. The woman with silver hair and wire glasses stepped forward first. "I'm Cordelia," she said, taking a towel with steady hands. "Cordelia Mason. I was a teacher for 30 years before the school closed down." "Meredith Collins," said the young mother, setting her boys down gently. "These are my sons Tommy and Jake." The little boys stared at Harlan with eyes big as dinner plates. Tommy, the older one, might have been 6 years old. Jake looked about 4 and had a gap between his front teeth. "You live here all by yourself?" Tommy asked in the way only children could, direct and innocent and cutting straight to the heart. Harlan's throat closed up like someone had wrapped wire around it. He remembered another little boy asking the same question a lifetime ago. Before the fire, before everything went wrong. "Yes," he managed to whisper. "That must be lonely," Jake said, then yawned and leaned against his mother's leg. The other women introduced themselves one by one, their names floating through the air like prayers. Vivian Harper, whose hands were stained green from working in gardens that no longer belonged to her. Ophelia Stone, whose calloused palms told stories of farms lost to banks and drought. Delphine Roberts, who spoke with the gentle voice of someone used to caring for sick people. Beatrice Quinn, with paint under her fingernails and dreams dying in her tired eyes. And finally, the white-haired woman who had spoken to him on the porch. "Rosalind," she said simply. "Rosalind Webb." Her voice was soft as whisper, like she'd forgotten how to speak above the sound of her own heartbeat. 7 names, 7 stories, 7 lives that had somehow led them all to his door on this stormy night. Harlan made himself busy lighting a fire in the old stone fireplace. His hands remembered the motions even though his mind felt lost in fog. The women gathered around the growing flames like flowers turning toward the sun. "We should explain," Cordelia said, adjusting her wire glasses, "about why we're here." Harlan's stomach twisted into knots. "You don't owe me explanation." "Yes, we do," Meredith said firmly. She pulled her boys closer as they started to warm up by the fire. "You opened your door to strangers. You deserve to know who we are." Vivian spoke next, her voice hollow as an empty well. "I lost my husband 6 months ago. Cancer. Spent every penny we had trying to save him. Lost the house last week." Ophelia stared into the flames. "Bank took my farm. 3 generations my family worked that land. Gone. School budget cuts." Cordelia added with a bitter laugh. 30 years of teaching children, and they let me go like I was nothing." Delphine's eyes filled with tears. "I was a nurse. Gave everything to help my patients. When I got sick myself, insurance wouldn't cover treatments. Lost my job. Lost my apartment." Beatrice held up her paint-stained hands. "Nobody wants to buy paintings when they can barely afford food. Been living in my car for 2 months. Finally, all eyes turned to Rosalind. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then whispered so quietly they had to lean forward to hear. "My son died in Afghanistan. After the funeral, I just stopped talking to people, stopped paying bills, stopped caring. Woke up last week and everything was gone. The only sound was rain hammering the roof and fire crackling in the hearth. 7 women, 7 tragedies, 7 lives broken by a world that had forgotten how to care." Harlan's chest ached like someone had reached inside and squeezed his heart. He knew that feeling. The emptiness that ate you alive from the inside. The way grief could swallow you whole until you forgot what hope even felt like. "I should make soup," he said suddenly, needing to move before the weight of their stories crushed him flat. In the kitchen, his hands shook as he opened cans that had been sitting in his pantry for months. He hadn't cooked for other people in 37 years. The motions felt strange and foreign, like trying to remember a dance he'd only learned once. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his gap-toothed smile bright as sunshine after rain. "Can I help?" The simple question hit Harlan like a physical blow. His knees went weak. Another little boy had asked him the same thing once upon a time. Before the accident. Before everything fell apart. "I don't," Harlan started, then stopped. Tommy's face fell like a flower wilting in frost. "Some people are better at helping alone," Harlan finished quietly. But Tommy climbed up on a chair anyway and watched with curious eyes as Harlan stirred the soup. From the living room came the soft murmur of women's voices, and Jake's sleepy giggle as old Rex, Harlan's ancient dog, let the boy pet his graying fur. The house felt different, alive somehow, full of breath and heartbeat and the rustle of people living instead of just surviving. "Why do you live all by yourself?" Tommy asked again, the way children do when they want real answers. Harlan stopped stirring. The spoon trembled in his grip. "Some people are meant to be alone." "I don't think so," came Meredith's voice from behind him. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her brown eyes soft with something that might have been understanding. "I think some people just forget they were meant to be loved." The words hung in the air like smoke from the fire. Harlan's throat burned with unshed tears. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, wanted to explain about curses and guilt and the terrible things that happened when people got too close to him. Instead, he ladled soup into bowls with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. That night, as the storm raged outside and the women settled into makeshift beds on couches and floors, Harlan lay awake in his room staring at the ceiling. The house creaked with unfamiliar sounds, breathing that wasn't his own. Whispered good nights between the women. Jake talking in his sleep about horses. For the first time in 37 years, Harlan wasn't alone. And for the first time in 37 years, he was terrified of what morning might bring. Because history had a cruel way of repeating itself. And the last time 7 women had sought shelter under his roof, one of them never saw another sunrise. But morning came anyway, bringing with it the smell of pancakes and coffee brewing in his kitchen. Harlan lay in bed, afraid to move. The sounds drifting from downstairs were impossible. He'd lived alone for so long that cooking sounds felt like magic tricks his mind was playing on him. "Uncle Harlan," Tommy's voice called from somewhere below. "Uncle Harlan, comes Uncle Harlan." The words hit him like warm sunshine after a lifetime of winter. When had anyone called him uncle? When had anyone called him anything but the crazy hermit who lived alone on the mountain? He pulled on his clothes with shaking fingers and walked downstairs like a man approaching his own hanging. In the kitchen, he found chaos that looked like happiness. Meredith stood at his stove, flipping golden pancakes with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Jake sat at the table, syrup in his hair and joy on his face. Tommy ran circles around old Rex, who wagged his tail like a puppy instead of the 15-year-old dog he really was. "We made breakfast," Meredith announced, not looking up from the pan. "Hope that's okay." "Okay?" Harlan's throat felt stuffed with cotton. It was better than okay. It was the most beautiful thing he'd seen in 37 years. Cordelia sat at his kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, teaching Jake his letters while she ate. "See this one, sweetie? This is the letter H. Like Harlan." "Ease for Harlan," Jake repeated seriously, then grinned. "Ease for home." The word made Harlan's chest tight. Home. This place hadn't been a home in decades. It had been a hiding place, a tomb where he'd buried himself alive. Through the window, he watched Vivienne kneeling in his dead vegetable garden. Her hands worked the hard soil like she was bringing it back to life through pure will. Ophelia stood beside her, pointing at different spots and talking about drainage and crop rotation in the gentle voice of someone who understood growing things. "They've been up since sunrise," Meredith said, following his gaze. "Vivienne says your soil just needs love. Ophelia thinks you could grow enough vegetables to feed half the county." On the front porch, Beatrice had set up an easel made from old lumber and was painting the sunrise over the mountains. Her brush moved across the canvas like she was capturing magic and making it real. Even from inside, Harlan could see the joy in her face as colors bloomed under her hands. Delphine sat on the porch steps, gently examining Rex's back leg. The old dog had been limping for months, but Harlan had been too afraid to take him to the vet. Too afraid of what the vet might say about his only friend. "Just arthritis," Delphine called through the open door. "I can show you some exercises that will help him feel better." And Rosalind, quiet Rosalind, who spoke in whispers, was on her knees fixing his broken porch swing. Her hands moved with the skill of someone who knew how to make broken things whole again. "How?" Harlan whispered. "How what?" Meredith asked, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him. "How did you all know what to do? How did you know what this place needed?" Meredith sat down across from him, her coffee cup warm between her palms. "Broken recognizes broken," she said simply. "We can see what needs fixing because we know what it feels like to be unfixed." The pancakes tasted like heaven. Like childhood mornings he'd forgotten existed. Tommy climbed into the chair beside him and chatted about everything and nothing while Jake practiced writing his letters on a napkin. "Tell us about your ranch," Cordelia said, pushing her wire glasses up her nose. "It's beautiful land. Must have stories." Harlan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Stories. This place was full of stories, but most of them ended badly. "Not much to tell." "I bet there is," Ophelia said, coming inside with dirt on her knees and hope in her eyes. "This soil has been loved before. I can feel it. Someone cared for this land once upon a time. Someone had. Sarah had planted flowers everywhere, had sung to the vegetables as she tended them, had made this place bloom like a garden in paradise before the fire took it all away. "My wife," Harlan said quietly. "She loved growing things." The women went very still. Even Tommy stopped chattering. "Where is she now?" Jake asked with the innocent cruelty of children who don't understand that some questions cut like knives. "She's gone," Harlan whispered. Meredith reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm and real and alive. "I'm sorry." The simple words broke something loose in Harlan's chest. When had anyone said they were sorry for his loss? When had anyone cared about his pain? "She would have loved this," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "All of you. She always said this house was too big for just two people." "What was her name?" Rosalind asked softly. "Sarah." The name felt strange on his tongue after years of keeping it locked away. "Sarah Elizabeth Briggs." "Sarah Elizabeth Briggs," Cordelia repeated like a prayer. "That's a beautiful name." For the next few hours, Harlan watched his ranch transform under the women's care. Vivienne and Ophelia worked magic in the garden, coaxing green shoots from earth that had been barren for decades. Cordelia organized his cluttered shelves and created a reading corner where the boys could do their lessons. Delphine cleaned and bandaged a cut on Rex's paw that Harlan hadn't even noticed. Beatrice painted the sunrise and made it look like hope itself was rising over the mountains. And Meredith, she moved through his house like she'd always belonged there, making lunch, settling arguments between the boys, humming songs that filled the empty spaces with music. By evening, the house felt alive in ways Harlan had forgotten were possible. The women had claimed spaces without asking permission. Cordelia's books on the mantel, Vivienne's herbs drying in the kitchen window. Ophelia's work gloves by the back door, Delphine's medical bag on the coffee table, Beatrice's paintings leaning against the walls, Rosalind's toolkit in the hall closet, and everywhere the sound of voices and laughter and life being lived instead of just survived. "We should talk about leaving," Cordelia said as they sat around the dinner table Harlan hadn't used in years. "We've imposed on your kindness long enough." The words hit Harlan like ice water in his veins. Leaving. Of course they were leaving. Everyone always left. "You don't have to," he started. "We have to be realistic," Vivian interrupted gently. "We can't live off your charity forever." "It's not charity," Harlan said, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "You've done more for this place in one day than I've done in 10 years. "Still," Ophelia said, "we need to make plans, find work, build lives." "Stay," Harlan heard himself say. The word came out like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Please stay." 7 faces stared at him. Even the boys had gone silent. "Stay," he said again, his voice breaking. "All of you. Stay and help me bring this place back to life. Stay and let me help you build something new." That night, Harlan sat alone on his porch while the women talked in hushed voices inside. Through the window, he could see them passing around something, a photograph he kept hidden in his bureau drawer. A picture he hadn't looked at in years, but couldn't bring himself to throw away. His hands trembled as he realized what they'd found, what they were seeing. The photograph from 37 years ago. 7 women and a young man standing in front of this very house, all of them smiling like they had no idea how quickly happiness could turn to ash. And in the center of the group, her red hair shining in the sunlight, stood Sarah, beautiful Sarah, who died because he hadn't been fast enough, smart enough, brave enough to save her. Now the 7 women inside knew the truth. They knew about the pattern, about the curse that followed him everywhere he went. Soon they would leave, just like everyone else had. And he would be alone again, with nothing but memories and regret for company. But for one perfect day, his house had been full of love again. For one perfect day, he'd remembered what it felt like to be needed. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than he deserved. But morning came anyway, and with it something impossible happened. The 7 women were still there. Harlan found them in his kitchen, passing the old photograph between gentle hands like it was made of butterfly wings. They looked up when he walked in, their eyes soft with something that might have been understanding instead of fear. "We found this in your bureau," Meredith said quietly. "We were looking for extra blankets." Harlan's throat closed up. There he was in the faded picture, young and hopeful and stupid enough to believe he could save everyone. And there was Sarah, her red hair catching sunlight, her green eyes full of love and dreams and all the tomorrows that had been stolen from her. "You don't have to explain," Cordelia said gently. "Yes, I do." Harlan's voice came out like gravel. "You have a right to know what kind of man you're living with." He sat down at his own table like a stranger. The photograph lay between them, 37 years of guilt and secret spread out in fading colors. "Her name was Sarah Elizabeth," he began. "She was 19 when we married. I was 23 and thought I was smart enough to fix the whole world." The women listened without judgment. Even Tommy and Jake sat quietly, sensing that grown-up words were being spoken. The other women in that picture, they were Sarah's family, her sisters, her cousins, her best friend from school. When the drought hit and their families lost everything, Sarah begged me to help them, said we had all this space and they had nowhere to go. Vivienne touched the photograph with one finger. "They look happy here." They were. For 2 years this place was paradise. 7 women making a life together, helping each other, raising children, growing food. Sarah was the heart of it all. She made everything beautiful. Harlan's hands shook as he remembered. But I was jealous sometimes. Jealous of how much she loved them, how much time she spent making sure everyone else was okay. I wanted her all to myself. The confession hung in the air like smoke. "What happened?" Rosalind asked in her whisper voice. "Fire," the word tasted like ash. "Started in the barn, spread faster than anyone could have imagined. I was out checking the fence line when I saw the smoke." He closed his eyes, but the memories came anyway. By the time I got back, the women were already outside. All of them except Sarah. She'd gone back into the house for something. "What?" Merida's voice was barely audible. "A music box. Her grandmother's music box that played Amazing Grace. Such a stupid, tiny thing. But it was all she had left of her family's old life." Tears ran down Harlan's weathered cheeks. I ran in after her, found her in the bedroom, trapped under a beam that had fallen. The music box was still in her hands, still playing that song even though everything was burning around us. The kitchen was silent except for the tick of the old clock on the wall. I pulled her out, got her to the yard, but the smoke, her lungs, she died in my arms while that music box kept playing. Delphine reached across the table and took his hand. "That wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" Harlan's voice cracked. "If I'd been home where I belonged, I could have stopped her. If I'd been a better husband, she wouldn't have cared more about some old music box than her own life." "Grief makes us do strange things," Ophelia said softly. "Makes us think we could have changed things we had no power to change." The other women left after the funeral, packed up and scattered to the winds. Couldn't stand to look at me anymore. The whole town blamed me too, said I was cursed, said anyone who got close to me would die. Beatrice wiped her eyes with paint-stained fingers. "So you decided they were right." "I decided to make sure it never happened again." Harlan looked around the table at their faces, and now here you are, 7 women again, needing help again. And I'm still the same man who couldn't save the person he loved most. Tommy, who had been listening with the serious-faced children wear when the world gets too heavy, climbed into Harlan's lap. "My daddy died too," he said simply. "Mommy says it wasn't anybody's fault. Sometimes people just die, and it makes everyone sad." Out of the mouths of babes. Harlan held the little boy close and felt something shift in his chest. A tiny crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Over the next few weeks, the women settled into the ranch like they'd always belonged there. Cordelia started teaching not just Tommy and Jake, but children from neighboring farms who walked miles to learn their letters. Vivienne's garden grew thick and green, providing vegetables for 3 families down the valley. Ophelia convinced 2 other struggling ranchers to try her sustainable farming methods. Delphine set up a small clinic in town, helping people who couldn't afford doctors. Beatrice painted portraits of local families and sold them at the farmer's market. Rosalind fixed everything that was broken: fences, tractors, hearts. And Meredith, she brought music back to the house. Not just her voice humming while she cooked, but actual music. She'd found Sarah's old piano in the barn and convinced the others to help her move it back inside. "Sarah would want it played," she said when Harlan protested. "Music is meant to be shared." Every evening now they gathered around that piano. Meredith would play songs that made everyone sing along. Even Harlan found himself humming melodies he'd forgotten he knew. But happiness made him nervous. Happiness felt dangerous, like walking on thin ice that might crack at any moment. One evening, Sheriff Douglas drove up the long driveway. He was the only person in town who still spoke to Harlan, and then only when duty required it. He'd been a young deputy 37 years ago, fresh out of training and trying not to throw up at his first fire scene. "Harlan," the sheriff said with a nod. "Sheriff." Harlan stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. The sounds of dinner and laughter were muffled but still audible. Getting quite a setup here, Sheriff Douglas observed, watching Vivienne tend her garden in the evening light. They needed help. Folks in town are talking. Harlan's stomach clenched. What kind of talking? Some say it's just like before. 7 women living with old Harlan Briggs. They remember what happened last time. Through the window, Harlan could see Meredith helping Tommy with his homework while Jake played with Rex on the floor. Cordelia graded papers by lamplight. Delphine mended a torn shirt with careful stitches. They seem happy, Sheriff Douglas said. They are happy. The words surprised Harlan with their fierceness. You happy too? The question hit like a physical blow. Happy? Harlan had almost forgotten what the word meant. But watching Tommy chase fireflies in the yard while his mother sang lullabies, listening to Cordelia read stories aloud by the fire, seeing Vivienne's flowers bloom in soil that had been dead for decades. Despite everything, despite the fear that lived like a cold stone in his chest, he was happy. Yeah, he whispered. I think I am. Sheriff Douglas studied his face in the porch light. Then maybe it's time you stopped punishing yourself for something that was never your fault to begin with. That night, Harlan found Meredith sitting on the porch swing Rosalind had repaired. The wood moved smooth as silk now, no more creaking or wobbling. Like everything else the women touched, they'd made it better than it was before. Can't sleep? She asked. Haven't slept well in 37 years. She patted the space beside her. Want to not sleep together? He sat down, careful to leave space between them. But Meredith scooted closer until their shoulders touched. The sheriff came by, Harlan said. I saw. What did he want? To remind me that history has a way of repeating itself. Does it? Meredith's voice was thoughtful. Or do we just tell ourselves it does because we're afraid to believe in second chances? Before Harlan could answer, screams erupted from inside the house. Not happy screams or playing screams, but the kind of screams that meant something was terribly wrong. The smell of smoke drifted through the open door. Harlan's blood turned to ice. Not again. Please God, not again. Fire. The kitchen blazed like the mouth of hell itself. Orange flames licked at the ceiling where grease had splattered and caught. Smoke poured through the doorway in thick, choking clouds. Through the chaos, Harlan could hear Tommy and Jake screaming from their bedroom upstairs. This was how it started before. Fire and screaming and his legs turning to water when people needed him most. But something was different this time, something that made his heart slam against his ribs with hope instead of just terror. The 7 women didn't freeze. They didn't stand around waiting for him to save them. They moved like a team that had practiced for this moment their whole lives. Cordelia grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, her teacher's voice cutting through the panic. Everyone stay calm. We've got this. Vivienne herded Tommy and Jake down the stairs and out the front door, her arms wrapped around them like a shield. You're safe, babies, you're safe. Ophelia ran to the stove and shut off the gas lines with hands that didn't shake. Fire's contained to the stovetop. It won't spread. Delphine grabbed the phone and dialed for help, her nurse's training taking over. Fire department. We need trucks at the Briggs Ranch, but it's small. Kitchen fire, under control. Beatrice drew wet towels over anything that could catch flame, moving with the quick grace of someone who knew how to protect beautiful things. Rosalind opened every window in the house, creating airflow to pull the smoke outside instead of letting it fill their lungs with poison. And Meredith, brave, beautiful Meredith, stood beside Harlan as they fought the flames together. I can't lose you, he gasped through the smoke. Not again. I can't lose any of you. You won't, she said firmly, spraying foam at the base of the fire. We're not going anywhere. When the flames died under the foam, when the smoke cleared and the fire trucks arrived to find everything already handled, they all sat on the front porch covered in soot and breathing hard. The children were safe. The house still stood. Nobody had died trying to save a music box or anything else. But Harlan shook like a leaf in a hurricane. His hands trembled so violently he couldn't hold his coffee cup. The memories crashed over him in waves. Sarah's face in the smoke, her voice calling his name, the music box still playing while everything burned around them. Harlan Meredith's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Harlan, you need to breathe." He was breathing, wasn't he? But his lungs felt like they were full of concrete. His chest rose and fell, but no air seemed to get in. "Tell us," Cordelia said gently. She sat beside him on the porch steps, her wire glasses crooked but her voice steady. "Tell us what really happened 37 years ago." So he did. With his voice raw from smoke and his heart breaking all over again, Harlan told them everything. The women who came here before, they weren't just strangers asking for help. They were Sarah's family. Her sister Emma, who was pregnant with twins. Her cousin Ruth, who couldn't read but could sing "See an Angel." Her best friend Mary, who made everyone laugh even when times were hard. The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. "I married Sarah to save them all. Her father owed money to bad men. The drought had killed their crops. They were going to lose everything. So I offered to take Sarah as my wife and give her family a home." Vivian wiped soot from her face. "That was kind of you." "It was selfish," Harlan said bitterly. "I'd been alone my whole life. My parents died when I was young. I had this big empty ranch and no one to share it with. Sarah was the most beautiful girl in 3 counties. I thought I was getting a bargain." "But you grew to love her," Rosalind whispered. "God help me, yes. She made this place magic, made me feel like I was worth something. We were so happy." His voice broke. "For 2 years we were so happy." "What happened the night of the fire?" Delphine asked softly. Harlan closed his eyes, but the memories came anyway. "I'd been angry with Sarah that day. Jealous and stupid and mean. She'd spent the whole morning helping Emma with the babies instead of having breakfast with me. I said terrible things, told her she cared more about everyone else than her own husband. The shame of it burned worse than any fire. She cried. Sarah never cried, but I made her cry, so I stormed off to check the fence line, too proud to apologize. When I saw the smoke, "You blamed yourself for not being there," Ophelia said. "I blamed myself for everything. For the fight. For leaving her. For not running faster when I saw the flames. For not being strong enough to pull that beam off her sooner." Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "But mostly, I blamed myself for the look in her eyes when she died." "What look?" Meredith asked. "Forgiveness. Even dying because of my selfishness, she looked at me with nothing but love and forgiveness. It broke something in me that never healed." The women sat in silence, letting his words settle between them like dust after a storm. "The music box," Tommy said suddenly. He'd been listening from the porch rail where his mother had told him to stay. The one that played the pretty song. "Did she save it?" Harlan nodded. "It was still clutched in her hands when I carried her outside. Still playing that tune even though everything else was broken. Then she did save something," Jake said with the simple wisdom of children. "She saved the music." The words hit Harlan like a lightning bolt. In all these years of guilt and grief, he'd never thought of it that way. Sarah hadn't died for nothing. She died protecting something beautiful. Something that mattered. "Where is it now?" Cordelia asked. "The music box. Buried with her. I couldn't stand to hear that song anymore." "That's sad," Tommy said. "Music is supposed to make people happy." As the fire trucks drove away and the neighbors went back to their own homes, the 8 of them sat together on the porch watching stars come out over the mountains. "We're not them," Meredith said quietly. "Sarah's family. We're not repeating their story. Aren't you?" Harlan's voice was hollow. 7 women, lost and alone, coming to my ranch for help. A fire that almost took everything. How is that not the same story? Because this time, Vivian said, you weren't alone when it happened. This time, Cordelia added, we all fought the fire together. This time, Ophelia continued, nobody died trying to save something that couldn't save them back. This time, Delphine said softly, you trusted us to take care of ourselves. This time, Beatrice whispered, you let yourself be part of the family instead of trying to carry everything alone. This time, Rosalind said in her clear, strong voice, you chose love over fear. And Meredith, beautiful Meredith with soot in her hair and hope in her eyes, took his scarred hands in hers. This time, she said, you get to write a different ending. That night, as the house settled into quiet rhythms and the smell of smoke faded from the air, Harlan lay awake staring at the ceiling. But for the first time in 37 years, the memories that kept him awake weren't all painful ones. He thought about Sarah's laughter echoing through these rooms. He thought about the way she'd sung while cooking breakfast, the way she'd made everyone feel welcome and loved. And he thought about Meredith humming those same kind of songs, about Tommy and Jake's laughter filling the spaces that had been silent too long. About 7 women who had chosen to stay even after learning the worst thing about him. Maybe Meredith was right. Maybe this time he did get to write a different ending. Maybe this time love would be stronger than fear. 3 months passed like pages turning in a beautiful book. The kitchen had been repaired, better than before. The ranch bloomed under the 7 women's care like a garden after rain. Even the neighbors stopped whispering and started visiting, bringing their children to Cordelia's lessons and their sick animals to Delphine's gentle hand. Zarvan learned to live with happiness again, though it still felt strange on his shoulders like clothes that didn't quite fit. He taught Tommy to ride the old mare, Buttercup, who had been lonely in the pasture for years. He helped Beatrice build a proper studio in the barn, where light streamed through windows she'd painted with wildflowers. He listened to Cordelia's dreams of expanding the school and found himself nodding along, making plans. He worked beside Vivienne in the garden, learning the names of plants he'd forgotten existed. He held the ladder while Rosalind repaired the barn roof, with steady, sure hands. He brought soup to Delphine when she caught cold from working too hard caring for others. And with Meredith, every moment felt like a gift wrapped in gold paper. She made him laugh until his sides ached. She asked his opinion about everything from what to plant in the spring, to which story to read the boys at bedtime. She made him feel needed in ways that had nothing to do with rescue and everything to do with partnership. But happiness made him careless. One warm evening in late summer, while Harlan was in the barn helping Ophelia deliver a calf, Meredith decided to clean his bedroom. She'd been putting it off for months, knowing men could be particular about their private spaces, but dust was gathering in the corners, and she wanted everything perfect for the harvest festival Cordelia was planning. She found the hidden photograph while moving his dresser to sweep behind it. The frame had fallen between the furniture and the wall, forgotten in shadows for who knew how long. Her hands trembled as she pulled it free and wiped away years of dust. In the picture, a young Harlan stood with his arm around the most beautiful woman Meredith had ever seen. She had red hair that caught sunlight like fire, green eyes full of laughter, and a smile that could have powered the whole valley. Behind them, 6 other women posed with the easy comfort of family. At the bottom, someone had written in faded ink, "The Briggs Family Ranch, May 9th. Meredith sank onto his bed, staring at the photograph. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. All this time she'd imagined Sarah as a neighbor, maybe a girlfriend, someone Harlan had loved and lost to sickness or accident. But the way his arm curved around the red-haired woman's waist, the matching rings glinting on their fingers, the word always written in feminine handwriting, This wasn't a girlfriend. This was his wife. Meredith, Harlan's voice came from downstairs. You up there? She heard his boots on the steps coming closer. Her throat felt stuffed with cotton. Why hadn't he told them? Why keep such a huge secret? Harlan appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from helping with the birth. His smile faded when he saw what she held in her hands. Where did you find that? His voice came out like a whisper. Behind your dresser. She held up the photograph with hands that shook. Who is she, Harlan? This beautiful woman you have your arm around? The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. He sank into the chair by the window, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. Her name was Sarah, he said quietly. Sarah Elizabeth Briggs. She was my wife. The words hit Meredith like a physical blow. Wife. Not girlfriend, not neighbor, not childhood sweetheart. Wife. You were married. It wasn't a question. For 2 years. The happiest 2 years of my life. His voice cracked like old leather, until the fire took her away. Meredith stared at the photograph. Young Harlan looked so full of hope, so ready to take on the world. Sarah glowed with the kind of beauty that came from being deeply loved. The 7 women who came here before, she said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. They weren't just strangers asking for help. They were Sarah's family, her sister, her cousins, her best friends. When I married Sarah, I married all of them, brought them all here to make a life together. Why didn't you tell us? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Harlan's hands twisted together in his lap. Because you're them. Don't you see? 7 women, lost and alone, coming to my ranch for help. It's happening again, exactly like before, down to the smallest detail. That's why you were so afraid to let us in. That's why I should have said no. But looking at you that first night, soaked and scared with those boys depending on you, I couldn't turn you away, even knowing it would end the same way. Meredith set the photograph on the bedside table with careful hands. You think we're going to leave you? I think you're going to die because of me. The words came out like a sob. Just like Sarah did. Just like everyone who gets close to me does. That night, while Harlan sat alone on the porch drowning in memories, the 7 women gathered in the kitchen. They passed the photograph between them like a sacred object, studying every face, every detail. Look how happy they all seem, Vivienne murmured. Look how young he was, Cordelia added, tracing young Harlan's smile with one finger. So full of hope. She was beautiful, Delphine said softly. You can see why he loved her. You can see why she loved him too, Ophelia pointed out. Look at the way she's leaning into him. Like she feels safe there. He's been carrying this alone for 37 years, Beatrice whispered. All this guilt and grief, locked up inside. No wonder he was afraid to let us stay, Rosalind said in her clear, strong voice. He wasn't protecting himself from getting hurt. He was protecting us from what he thinks will happen to us. But it was Meredith who spoke the hardest truth. He's been waiting for us to leave from the very first day. Every kindness, every moment of happiness. He's been expecting it to end. That's why he never fully opened his heart. What do we do? Cordelia asked. Meredith looked around the table at these 6 women who had become her sisters. At Cordelia, with her patient teacher's heart. At Vivienne, with her gift for making things grow. At Ophelia, with her deep knowledge of the land. At Delphine, with her healing hands. At Beatrice, with her artist's eye for beauty. At Rosalind, with her quiet strength that fixed everything it touched. We show him the truth, she said finally. We show him that love isn't a curse. We show him that some patterns are meant to be broken. And if he still thinks we're going to leave, Meredith picked up the photograph one more time. Sarah's face smiled back at her, full of love and hope and all the dreams that had been cut short too soon. Then we prove him wrong. We stay anyway. We love him anyway. We show him that this time gets a different ending. Outside, Harlan sat alone with his guilt and his memories, convinced that morning would bring packed bags and tear-stained goodbyes. He had no idea that 7 women were inside his house, planning to fight for his heart whether he wanted them to or not. Morning came too soon. Harlan found the women packed and ready to go, their suitcases lined up by the kitchen table like soldiers preparing for battle. Their faces were kind but determined, the way people look when they've made hard decisions in the dark hours before dawn. Tommy and Jake sat on the floor beside their small bags, confusion written all over their young faces. Rex lay between them, his old head resting on Jake's leg like he was trying to comfort a heartbroken child. "We talked all night," Meredith said gently. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she folded dish towels she'd washed 100 times. "And we think it's best if we go." Harlan nodded, his heart shattering into pieces so small they felt like dust in his chest. "I understand." "Do you?" Cordelia asked, pushing her wire glasses up her nose. "Because we don't think you do." Harlan looked up, confused. Cordelia's teacher voice was sharp with something that sounded almost like anger. "We're not leaving because we're afraid of your so-called curse," Vivian said, stepping forward with dirt still under her fingernails from tending the garden at sunrise. "We're leaving because you don't trust us enough to let us make our own choices." "What do you mean?" Ophelia crossed her arms, her weathered face set in hard lines. "You decided we couldn't handle the truth about Sarah. You decided we were too weak to stay if we knew she was your wife. That's not. You made the same mistake now that you made 37 years ago," Delphine interrupted, her nurse's voice cutting through his protests. "You tried to protect us by lying to us." Rosalind spoke clearly, her whisper voice gone, replaced by something strong as steel. "Sarah's family didn't leave because you failed to save her. They left because you couldn't forgive yourself. You pushed them away with your guilt," Beatrice added, wiping paint from her fingers with a rag. "Just like you're pushing us away now." Meredith's voice trembled with something between sadness and fury. "Don't you see, Harlan? We're not Sarah's family. We're not repeating history. We're trying to write our own story, but you won't let us." "But the pattern." "There is no pattern," Meredith cried, her composure finally cracking. "There are just people who need each other, finding ways to build a family together. There are just second chances that you're too scared to take." The children ran to Harlan then, wrapping their small arms around his legs. Tommy looked up with tears in his brown eyes. "Don't let them take us away," he pleaded. "This is our home now. You're our family." "Please, Uncle Harlan," Jake added, his gap-toothed smile wobbling. "We don't want to go back to sleeping in the van." Harlan looked around the kitchen at these 7 hearts who had brought his house back to life. At Cordelia, who had turned his living room into a classroom where children learned to love books. At Vivienne, whose garden fed half the valley. At Ophelia, who had taught him that soil could be healed with patience and care. At Delphine, who had saved Rex's life and probably his own. At Beatrice, whose paintings made his walls sing with color. At Rosalind, who had fixed everything broken in his house and maybe in his heart too. And at Meredith, who had given him laughter and music and the terrifying, wonderful feeling that he might deserve to be happy. They weren't leaving because they were afraid. They were leaving because he still didn't believe he was worth staying for. "Sarah would have hated what you did to yourself," Meredith said softly, her anger melting into something that looked like grief. "She would have hated that you stopped living because she died. She would have hated that you turned your love for her into a prison." Harlan closed his eyes and could almost hear Sarah's voice echoing across 37 years. She'd always said life was for the living. She'd always said love was meant to be shared, not hoarded like treasure in a locked box. "If you want us to stay," Cordelia said, her teacher voice gentle now, "it has to be because you're ready to trust us. All of us, with the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It has to be because you're ready to believe you deserve happiness," Vivian added, her gardener's hand steady on her suitcase handle. "It has to be because you're ready to stop hiding behind Sarah's ghost," Ophelia continued, her farmer's wisdom cutting straight to the bone. "And start living in the world with the rest of us," Delphine finished, a healer's heart in her eyes. Harlan looked at the photograph Meredith had placed on the table between them. Young Sarah smiled back at him, her red hair bright with sunlight, her green eyes full of all the love she'd given him in their 2 short years together. For 37 years, he'd honored her memory by refusing to live. But maybe the best way to honor Sarah was to embrace the life she'd died trying to protect. Maybe the best way to love her was to learn to love again. "There's something else," Harlan whispered, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Something I need to tell you if you're going to stay." The women waited, their suitcases forgotten. "I don't just want you to stay as guests," he said, standing up straighter than he had in decades. "I want you to stay as family. Real family. Legal family." He looked at Tommy and Jake, their small faces bright with hope. "I want to adopt you boys officially. Give you the Briggs name and everything that goes with it." He turned to Cordelia. "I want you to build that school on the back 40 acres. Make it real and permanent and everything you dreamed it could be." To Vivian, "I want your greenhouse to take over the whole South Field if you want it to. I want you to teach the whole county how to make things grow." To Ophelia, "I want you to show me everything you know about healing the land. I want us to make this ranch a place where the earth itself feels loved." To Delphine, "I want you to set up a real clinic in town. Let me help you buy equipment and supplies. Let me help you save lives the way you saved mine." To Beatrice, "I want you to paint every wall in this house if it makes you happy. I want to help you have shows in the city and sell your work to people who understand beauty." To Rosalind, "I want you to know that your voice, strong and clear and true, is exactly what this house has been missing all these years." Finally, he turned to Meredith, got down on one knee right there in the kitchen, and pulled out a ring that had been hidden in his pocket for weeks. "Meredith Collins," he said, his voice shaking with hope and terror, and 37 years of loneliness finally coming to an end. "Will you marry me? Will you help me turn this house into a home for all of us? Will you help me write that different ending you promised?" The kitchen erupted in tears and cheers. Tommy and Jake jumped up and down like grasshoppers. Rex barked with excitement, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. The women hugged each other and cried and laughed all at the same time. But it was Meredith's whispered yes that finally healed all the broken places in Harlan Briggs' art. As she slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah's ring, which had been waiting in darkness for someone worthy of its light, Harlan understood something that had taken him 37 years to learn. Love didn't repeat tragic patterns. Love created new ones, stronger and more beautiful than anything that came before. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, love gave you a second chance to get it right. 1 year later, the Briggs family ranch bustled with life like a beehive in summer. The house that once echoed with loneliness now overflowed with voices, footsteps, arguments, celebrations, and the kind of beautiful chaos that comes when people choose to love each other every single day. Cordelia's school had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. 23 children from across the valley now walked or rode horses to the little red building Harlan had helped her construct on the back fort. She taught reading under the big oak tree when weather was nice, and her students' laughter carried on the wind like music. Vivian's greenhouse stretched across 3 acres of the south field, its glass panels catching morning sunlight and throwing rainbows across the vegetables growing in neat, perfect rows. Her produce supplied 4 towns now, and she'd hired 2 assistants to help manage the demand. The soil that had been dead for decades bloomed under her hands like a miracle. Ophelia's sustainable farming methods had been featured in 3 agricultural magazines. Ranchers came from 5 states to learn her techniques for healing damaged land. She'd given talks at the university and been invited to consult on farming projects across the country. But every evening she came home to her family and helped tend the land that had taught her everything she knew. Delphine's clinic in town had become the heart of the community. She'd delivered 17 babies, saved countless lives, and trained 2 young nurses who looked at her with the same admiration her patients did. The building Harlan had helped her buy was always full of people who knew she would listen to their troubles and heal whatever was broken in their bodies or hearts. Beatrice's paintings hung in galleries from Billings to Seattle. She'd sold enough artwork to buy a truck and hire an assistant to help ship her pieces to collectors who understood that beauty was worth paying for. But her favorite paintings still covered the walls of the ranch house, turning every room into a celebration of light and color. Rosalind ran the ranch's business operations with quiet efficiency, her whisper voice replaced by confident conversation and easy laughter. She balanced the books, managed the schedules, and somehow made sure everyone had what they needed before they even knew they needed it. Her repair skills had expanded to include farm equipment, and neighboring ranchers called her whenever something broke that needed fixing by gentle, knowing hands. And Meredith, Mrs. Meredith Briggs, with Sarah's ring sparkling on her finger and hope growing in her belly, had given birth to a daughter they named Hope, Elizabeth Briggs, after the future and the past, and the love that connected them both. Tommy and Jake, now officially Tommy Briggs and Jake Briggs, had grown tall and strong and confident in the way children do when they know they are deeply wanted. Tommy could ride any horse on the ranch and helped Ophelia with the cattle. Jake had discovered a gift for growing things and spent hours in Vivienne's greenhouse, his gap-toothed smile bright as sunshine as he learned the names of seeds and seasons. The house itself had been transformed. Cordelia's books filled shelves in every room. Vivienne's herbs hung drying in the kitchen windows. Ophelia's work boots sat beside everyone else's by the back door. Delphine's medical books lined the hallway. Beatrice's paintings turned the walls into windows, looking out on worlds of wonder. Rosalind's tools hung in neat rows in the mudroom. And everywhere, the sound of a baby's laughter mixed with grown-up voices planning tomorrow and next week and next year. But the most healing moment came on a quiet Sunday evening in late autumn, when Harlan visited Sarah's grave for the first time in 37 years. Meredith walked beside him, carrying baby Hope in her arms, while the other women followed at a respectful distance. The boys ran ahead, gathering wild flowers from Vivienne's cutting garden, flowers she'd planted, especially for this visit. The headstone was simple grey marble, weathered by decades of Montana winters but still readable. Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, beloved wife, 19. "I'm sorry it took me so long," Harlan whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. "I'm sorry I wasted so many years being afraid to live." He knelt and placed the wildflowers at the base of the stone, black-eyed Susans and purple asters, cosmos and marigolds, all the colors Sarah had loved best. "But I want you to know," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "your friends are okay. Not the ones from before. They have their own lives now, their own families, and I hope they found happiness. But these women, these beautiful souls who found their way to us, they're safe and loved and home." Baby Hope gurgled happily in Meredith's arms, reaching tiny fingers toward the flowers. The sound made Harlan smile through his tears. "She would have loved this," Meredith said softly, looking around at their chosen family gathered in the cemetery's peaceful quiet. all the noise and chaos and joy. She would have loved watching the children grow up. She would have loved being an aunt to Hope. She would have loved you, Harlan replied, meaning it with his whole heart. That evening, as the household settled into comfortable routines that had become sacred over the past year, children's bedtime stories read by whoever was available, quiet conversations over tea and leftover cake, plans for tomorrow's work discussed around the kitchen table, Harlan sat on the porch swing with his wife and watched the stars come out over the valley. The swing moved smooth as silk, now under Rosalind's care, no creaking or wobbling. Like everything else the women had touched, they'd made it better than it was before. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, adjusting baby Hope's blanket as she slept between them. "Giving up your old life to stay here with a broken-down rancher and 6 other women?" Meredith laughed, the sound as beautiful as any music Sarah's grandmother's music box had ever played. "This isn't the life I planned when I loaded Tommy and Jake into that van and drove away from everything we'd ever known. But it's the life I needed." "We all needed each other, Harlan. That's what family is. People who need each other and choose to stay anyway. People who see your broken places and love you in spite of them, but because healing those broken places together makes everyone stronger." Through the windows they could see their chosen family winding down from another full day. Cordelia grading papers by lamplight, planning lessons that would spark young minds. Vivienne reading seed catalogues, dreaming of next year's garden. Delia teaching Tommy chess strategy while Jake played with blocks on the floor. Delphine knitting tiny booties for the neighbor's expected baby, her healer's hands creating softness in the world. Beatrice sketching the view from her easel, capturing the way moonlight turned the mountains into silver dreams. Rosalind organizing everyone's schedules with gentle authority, making sure no one was forgotten or left behind. 7 hearts, 1 home, Meredith murmured, echoing words she'd spoken the night they'd decided to stay. 1 home, Harlan agreed, finally understanding that love didn't repeat tragic patterns. It created new ones, stronger and more beautiful than anything that had come before. As the Montana wind whispered through the valley, carrying the sounds of a house full of love, baby Hope's soft breathing, Rex's contented snores, the gentle murmur of women's voices planning tomorrow's adventures, Harlan Briggs knew he was finally completely, perfectly home. Not because he lived alone anymore, but because he'd learned that the best way to honor the past was to build a future worthy of it. Not because he'd stopped missing Sarah, but because he'd discovered that love didn't end with death. It grew and changed and found new ways to bloom in willing hearts. The ranch that had once stood empty now stood complete. Not with 1 family, but with 8 souls who had chosen to become something greater together than they ever could have been apart. 8 people who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from a single voice, but from a harmony of hearts singing the same song of home. And in the distance, if you listened very carefully on quiet nights when the wind was just right, you could almost hear the sound of a music box playing a gentle lullaby, not sad anymore but peaceful, not an ending but a blessing on all the new beginnings love had made possible. In a house where 7 women had once sought shelter from a storm, 9 people now lived and loved and built tomorrow together, proving that some stories don't repeat, they transform, growing more beautiful with each telling. What an incredible journey of love, healing and second chances. Harlan's story proves that sometimes the most broken hearts can build the strongest families. I'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Drop your city and country in the comments below. It absolutely amazes me how our beautiful community spans the entire globe, all coming together to share these powerful stories of hope and redemption. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that like button to help spread kindness to others who need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us reach more people who who could use a reminder that love really can conquer fear. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these uplifting stories alive. Speaking of incredible stories, there's another amazing tale of unexpected love and transformation waiting for you right now. Click on the video appearing on your screen. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose for ourselves. Keep spreading kindness, and I'll see you in the next story.